Hello and welcome back to another video with basically HTML and CSS, but this time what we're going to do is we're going to be taking a look at implementing some new pages using a router, which I am going to be developing in another language, and this language is Haxe. You may or may not have heard of it, but for those of you who have not, we're going to be taking a look at it today using Visual Studio Code. I'm not going to be using brackets because Visual Studio Code provides has got an extension for us to use Haxe properly. This is something weird. That is not what I'm looking for. Let's open folder. Let's go to our websites, Jquery Biz. We're going to create a new folder. We're going to call it client. Select. So I'm basically going to set up my Haxe environment. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to type, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it build.hxml. Let's get rid of that welcome page, don't need that. In here, oops, no, not right now, thank you. In here what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell it to look into a specific folder of where our source files are going to be. We're going to tell it to create a JavaScript file, so we want to go out of this folder and into a scripts file, and I'm going to call it main.js. And then I need to specify the main entry point, which is just called main. Now at the moment this isn't going to do anything because obviously we haven't created the two folders that I've just mentioned, which is our src folder. We need to put in here our main.ajax file, which is our Haxe file. I'm going to initialize a package. I'm going to call the class main, and the last thing we are going to do is implement our main entry points, which is this here. Now, as you know, I'm more of a programmer than a web designer. I can do web design, as you can probably tell, but it takes me a while to get things done when it comes to web design. Now, in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a folder. I'm going to call it scripts, which is the folder that I mentioned in here, which is the scripts. So when we go ahead and build this project, what it's going to do is it's going to generate a JavaScript file called main inside of scripts, right? So down here, what I'd like to do is I want to reference that file. So script src scripts and main.js. It currently can't find it right now because obviously we don't have that file yet. But it does mean that when we work on this project, we don't have to copy and paste anything. So in this project, the way that this is going to work is we are going to work with the JavaScript API, right? Now there's a specific JavaScript package within Haxe that we can use, and that is, of course, JS, right? And we've got all of this data here. Now we might use Jquery at some point. In fact, we are going to use Jquery. But in order to use that, we will need to add Jquery to our project. So instead of doing that though, what I'm going to do is use this star here, which is going to include everything within every class that exists within this JS package. But it won't include the namespaces. So just be aware of that. So first things first, let's go to our terminal. And we're going to say Haxe build.hxml. Oops. HXML, there we go. So that's going to excuse me. So that's going to generate our main .js file, which is here. So as you can see, it's generated by Haxe 3.4.4 and it's generated this code. It's not doing anything right now because we haven't added anything yet. But that's just a test to get this to work properly. So when we go ahead and actually start implementing our pages and implementing our router, we can actually identify what it is that we're looking at. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut all of this. I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call it pages. And I'm going to create a file called front.htm. And I'm going to paste it all in there. So right now there's nothing there apart from this image in the corner. Right. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a router. For now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use hash-based URLs, but later on what we're going to do is we're going to actually use the history API. Shut up. So that it makes sorry about that. So we're going to use the history APIs to make user-friendly URLs. Okay. So in here, what I'm going to do is create a router. Now there are several ways in which we can do this. The way that I'm going to do it is quite simply, I'm going to create a static variable and I'm going to call it paths. Okay. Actually, no. I'm going to do it a different way actually. I'm going to do it a different way. So in here, what we can do is we can get our browser. Why is it? Should be including. No, never mind. I know it's there. Yeah. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to get our window. We're going to add an event listener and we're going to do a hash change. Right. So I'm going to create a function called router and I'm going to pass that in here. Okay. So every time the hash is changed, we're going to call router. Now the first thing, again, what we want to do is when the web page is loaded, immediately we want to call router, because when we load the page initially, it's not going to pick up a hash change. So we want to call this inside the main function, and obviously that's going to be called immediately when the page is loaded. So inside of our router then, what we want to do is we want to get the hash of the URL. So we want to get our path, and that is going to be our browser location, and then hash, right? So that includes the hash as well. So what we want to do is say path name is equal to path.substr1. So basically what that's going to do is going to say we want to get rid of the hash and only get back the URL after the hash. So if our path name is empty, then we want to assume that we're looking at the front page, right? So we called our front page front.htm. Okay, so I'm going to pass in here front. I'm going to create another function now, and I'm going to call that load page, and I'm going to pass in the URL. This is going to be of type string. And this is the great thing about Haxe, right? In JavaScript, it assumes, based on type inference, what the type is, and based on what value you pass into that variable. But that is very error prone. Very error prone. We don't want type inference. That's why languages like TypeScript and other such languages have become very popular, because you can actually use JavaScript using a different language where you can actually specify the type of the variables that you want to use. Obviously we are using type inference here, for example, but it knows that this type is a string. It knows this type is a string because it's being compiled. JavaScript isn't compiled, and as a result, debugging web pages using JavaScript is not necessarily easy, right? So inside of here, what we want to do is we want to load a page. How do we do that? Well, what we've got is two different ways in which we can do that. We can use jQuery, but I actually prefer to use the XML HTTPS. XML HTTP request. The reason I prefer to do this, and we need to import js.html.star so that it knows what that is. Okay, so the reason I prefer to use this over Ajax is because Ajax well, it uses a kind of a bizarre way of, it uses a bizarre coding convention which I'm not 100% okay with. That's just me. I prefer to do it this way. That's, yeah. That's just the way I roll. So in here, what I'm going to do is say on ready state change. This is going to be a function which is going to pass in a function, an anonymous function here. We're not going to declare a separate function just to do this. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say open. So we want to get URL, and we're going to pass in that URL. And lastly, in fact, actually, pages plus that, right? Then we want to send. Not sending any data, so we don't need to worry about that. Now, when our ready state change is changed, what we want to check for is if the status is 200 and the ready state is equal to 4, then we want to actually load it. So we do have our content here, which is the information where we want to contain everything. So all we really need to do is just say browser.document.getElement by ID, and that ID is content, and then we're going to say inner HTML, and that is going to be equal to whatever the response is, and that's going to be response text. Okay, so let's go ahead and build that. That has compiled, and if we go back to here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply refresh. Hash change. Is that correct? Did I do that correctly? On hash change. Hash change events. Hash change. That's what it's called. Window.add event listener. So it is bound to the window. That is correct. We pass it in there. That's fine. We call the router. We get our path. I'd like to wonder what that is. Let's have a look. Let's have a look. Developer tools. Let's take a look here. So there's nothing immediately eye-catching that's telling us, no, this is wrong. So what's going on? Scripts main.js. So in our main, we call main.main here, right? And we call our main.router. Oh, I forgot to call load page. That's why. I forgot to call load page. So what we need to do here is say load page. That might help. Might help. We need to load the page. And in fact, you know what? I'm not going to do it like this. I'm not going to do it like this. I'm going to do it like this. So pages slash and then .html. Right. So let's build that and let's take a look at this. So let's refresh. Oh, what's going on here? Failed to load the resource. The server responds with the status of 404. Oh. Oh. Let's do that. No problems. Refresh. Oh. Huh. Oh, we're passing in path, not path name. Might be a good idea. Right, okay. So we got it working in the end. Making mistakes, probably because I'm recording. So now we've got our content, we got our front page back, and that's all working, so that's all good. So now we can move on to actually implementing these links. Obviously, what I'm going to do is we're going to have two ways in which we can do this. The first way is to use our hash-based router, which we will use for the time being, but we will use the history API. And what we'll do is we will implement a fallback, to hash-based URLs if we are within a web browser that does not does not support the history API. But we'll save that for another time. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial for introducing you to Haxe and how to use Haxe to create a simple router in using HTML5 and CSS3 as well. So yeah, we'll expand on this later. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time.